They say there were only two sides in the War of the Ring. That light faced darkness, and good men stood against evil. But those who look closer, those who peer into the shadow, know better. For even among the forces of darkness, a hidden war brewed. Not all dark towers cast the same shadow. Behind the black gates of Mordor and the stone walls of Isengard, a secret conflict took root. Not of swords and armies alone, but of pride, ambition, and betrayal. At first glance, the two towers appeared allied. Smoke rose from Mount Doom as legions of orcs marched, and from the forges of Uruk-hai came twisted beasts born for battle. Their banners seemed to fly for the same cause, but this was illusion, a veil woven from lies. In truth, the White Wizard did not serve the Dark Lord. He sought to rival him. This is the tale of the war no army ever declared. A war fought not on battlefields, but in whispers, in stolen glances through Palantír, and in the secret chambers of power, where even friendship was a weapon, and trust a trap. To understand how this war began, we must return not to the Third Age, nor even the Second, but to the very dawn of time. Long before Saruman ever raised his voice in council, before Sauron donned his armor of fire and shadow, they were brothers of spirit, kindred beings, born of the same divine thought. In the beginning, there was Eru-Ilúvatar. From his mind came the Ainur, the Holy Ones, and among them were the Valar and the Lesser Maiar. Sauron, once called Mairon, and Saruman, known as Curumo, were Maiar of great power, servants of Aulë the smith. They shared a love of order, of structure, of crafting and shaping the world. And in those early days, they were not foes. They were kindred spirits, drawn to the forge, to fire, to creation itself. It was this shared nature, this mutual hunger for control and design, that would one day drive them apart. For ambition, once kindled, does not fade. It grows, quietly, persistently. By the time of the War of the Ring, that ancient kinship had withered into contempt. Sauron, reborn as the Lord of the Rings, sought domination. Saruman, who had once counseled patience and wisdom, had turned to secret studies, seeking knowledge not to serve, but to surpass. Their alliance, as many believed it to be, was but a mask, crafted to hide a far more dangerous truth, that each tower sought to eclipse the other. And now, with the return of the One Ring to the land of the living, the final chapter of their rivalry had begun. If you've enjoyed this journey into the hidden heart of darkness, consider subscribing to Realms Unraveled. More secrets lie ahead, and the story is only beginning. In the next chapter, we will follow Saruman's footsteps eastward, uncovering the path that led him to break from the White Council, to claim Isengard as his own, and to forge a kingdom not for Sauron, but against him. Until then, remember, in Middle-earth, not all darkness serves the same master. The fall of a great mind is never sudden. It begins in silence, in solitude, in the echo of unchallenged thoughts that swirl and build until they form a storm. And for Saruman the White, that storm first stirred not in the west, but far beyond the reach of council and kin. After the forging of the White Council in the Third Age, Saruman traveled east, beyond the lands of men, beyond the borders of the elves. With him went the elusive Blue Wizards, their names fading into myth. But Saruman's journey was not for curiosity, it was pursuit. He hunted the hidden knowledge of the enemy, the dark devices of Sauron. For years he wandered in shadow, studying the very arts he had vowed to oppose. He did not yet serve Sauron, nor had he betrayed his order. But the seeds of ambition had taken root. and knowledge, especially forbidden knowledge, has a price. It was in the year 2463 that Saruman returned from the east. He came not as a wanderer, but as a scholar, cloaked in the robes of wisdom, armed with a deeper understanding of the enemy. He stood ready to lead, and so he did, chosen as the head of the White Council, for none knew Sauron's mind better than he. But even then, doubt lingered in the heart of Mithrandir. Gandalf the Grey, who saw not only the wisdom in Saruman's voice, but the weight behind his silence. Soon, darkness stirred once more in Mirkwood, and the whispers of the necromancer grew into a name feared across the land. Sauron. The council debated. Strike now, or wait? Gandalf urged action, but Saruman counseled patience. He did so not out of loyalty to Sauron, but because he feared that if the enemy were driven out too soon, the ring might remain hidden. If Sauron remained, if his strength returned, then surely the ring would be drawn to him, and Saruman would be waiting. It was a gamble, a game of time and risk. To position himself closer to power, Saruman turned his eyes westward, to the realm of Rohan. There, nestled at the foot of the misty mountains, stood an ancient fortress, long abandoned. Isengard. Once it had been a watchtower of Gondor. Now it was a relic, a sleeping stone giant. Saruman approached Rohan's king, not as a conqueror, but as a friend. He offered to guard Isengard in the name of the West. And Frealaf, weary of war, welcomed the aid. But from the moment Saruman crossed into Orthanc, he began to carve a kingdom for himself. He searched the tower and its depths, uncovering secrets left behind by forgotten stewards, and there, in a chamber untouched by time, he found it, a Palantír, one of the seeing stones of old, a relic of immense power and peril. For a while, he resisted. He did not peer into its depths, not yet. But like the ring itself, the Palantír is patient. It whispers. It waits. From his black spire, Saruman watched the world. He watched Sauron grow in strength, watched the White Council hesitate, and most of all, he watched for the ring. For nearly a century, he built in secret. He fortified Isengard. He studied ring lore. He sent spies into the wilds. And always, his thoughts circled back to one question. Where is the ring? It was not Sauron he feared, but failure. For if another should find it first, be it elf, dwarf, or man, then all his careful schemes would collapse. That is why he delayed the council's hand against Dol Guldur, not because he served Sauron, but because he hoped to outwit him. A secret war had begun, one that neither side dared declare, but both understood too well. And in this war, the battlefield was not Mordor, not Gondor, not Rohan. It was the river Anduin. For somewhere in its winding paths, the ring had passed, and both dark towers now hunted it, each hoping to find it before the other. If this tale has stirred your curiosity, we invite you to journey further with us. Subscribe to Realms Unraveled for the next chapter, where we uncover the moment Saruman crossed a threshold he could never return from, when the White Wizard became the Ringmaker. In the high chamber of Orthanc, where the winds of the mountains whisper through black stone halls, a great silence once ruled. But that silence was broken, not by the clashing of steel or the cry of beasts, but by a voice smooth as velvet, sharp as broken glass. Saruman the White had become more than a steward of Isengard. He was now its master. And in the stillness of his tower, he turned at last to the thing he had long resisted, the Palantír. It is said, the Palantíri do not lie, but they do not show all. What they reveal depends on the strength and will of the one who gazes into them, and the will of the one who watches from the other side. Saruman believed himself prepared. He had studied the lore of the Eldar, the secrets of the Dunedain, the hidden writings of Numenor. He thought he could master the Seeing Stone. But even now, as he held it in his hands, he felt a pull, like the tide drawing him out into black water. When he looked, something looked back. Through the Palantír, Saruman came into the sight of Barad-dûr. There, in the shadow depths of the Dark Tower, Sauron waited. He did not speak, not at first. He had no need to. His will poured forth like smoke, like fire, like poison. And Saruman, proud though he was, began to bend. This was not submission, not yet. In his own mind, Saruman believed it was strategy. He told himself he was gathering knowledge, learning the enemy's strength. He would bide his time, discover the ring, and then cast Sauron down. But the Palantír had pierced his armor. The very act of using it had bound him. Thinly at first, like a spider's thread. But thread becomes rope, and rope becomes chain. And still, Saruman spun lies even to himself. When Gandalf came to Orthanc in the year 3018, summoned by the head of his order, he expected counsel, guidance. Instead, he found a man transformed. No longer Saruman the White, but Saruman of many colors. His robes shimmered with 1,000 hues. His eyes glittered with a strange light, and upon his hand was a ring. "I am Saruman the Wise," he said, his voice echoing from stone. "Saruman Ringmaker, Saruman of many colors." Gandalf saw then that the fall had already begun. This ring was not one of the great rings, but it was a symbol, a declaration. Saruman had stepped beyond the bounds of his order. He was no longer content to guard the world from darkness. He would shape it, rule it, bend it to his design. And what is a ruler without a crown? Saruman offered Gandalf a place at his side, not as a servant of Sauron, but as a partner in rebellion. They would take the ring, use it, and in doing so, they would outmatch even the Dark Lord. "And why not, Gandalf?" he whispered. "Why not take the ruling ring? The power would pass to us." But Gandalf refused. He saw what Saruman could not, that the ring corrupts not only the weak, but the wise. That domination, even in the name of order, is still domination. And so, he was imprisoned atop Orthanc, a guest turned prisoner. But the eagles still flew. Gwaihir the Wind Lord, noble lord of the skies, came at Gandalf's call. He bore him away from the Black Spire and delivered him to Edoras, where the free peoples still stirred with hope. And as the winds carried Gandalf westward, the last veil over Saruman's treachery was torn away. He had looked into the Palantír. He had forged a ring. He had made his choice. And Sauron knew. Through the Seeing Stone, the Dark Lord had read more than words. He had felt the pulse of ambition in Saruman's heart. He had seen the truth, that the White Wizard, if ever he found the ring, would not bring it to Mordor. He would keep it. Sauron bided his time, cloaking his rage, for even he could not yet breach the circle of Isengard. But his silence was not forgiveness. It was strategy. And Saruman, caught between deception and defiance, was now an enemy to both light and dark. If you're finding yourself drawn deeper into this hidden tale of treachery and pride, we invite you to continue this journey with us. Subscribe to Realms Unraveled to explore the darkest corners of Middle-earth's history. From the Black Spire of Orthanc, smoke began to rise, not the smoke of industry alone, but of something far more terrible. War was coming, but this was not Sauron's war. Saruman, now severed from the White Council and cast aside by the Dark Lord, moved in desperation and defiance. The alliance between Orthanc and Barad-dûr had always been a lie, a cold calculation beneath a facade of shared purpose. Now, the illusion had shattered. Both towers knew the truth. Only one would rule. But power is not inherited. It is seized. And Saruman would not wait for the ring to fall into Sauron's hands. He would act. The fields of Isengard were transformed into breeding pits of horror. Orcs marched in file beneath the mountains. Wolves howled from deep dens. And in the dark, hidden places, something new stirred. The Uruk-hai, Saruman's greatest perversion of nature, stronger than orcs, faster than men, fearless under the sun. Born of cruel experiment, these were not foot soldiers for Mordor. They bore no mark of the eye. Instead, they bore the white hand. Saruman's hand, his claim of dominion. The world believed Saruman marched to aid the shadow. Even the free peoples, watching the smoke rise over Isengard, feared that the White Wizard had joined the dark. But the truth was more complex. Saruman fought not for Sauron, but for the ring. He believed, he hoped, that the ring lay somewhere in the lands of Rohan, perhaps lost among the rivers, perhaps hidden by the heirs of Isildur, perhaps in the Shire. And if that were true, then the Rohirrim could not be allowed to find it first. So Saruman acted. He unleashed his army not to aid Mordor's siege of Minas Tirith, but to cripple Rohan before they could act, to clear a path to the ring, to remove any who might challenge his claim. This war, though it marched beneath dark clouds and was waged with monsters, was not Sauron's design. It was Saruman's, and Mordor noticed. Sauron watched through the Palantír, seething in silence. He saw the Uruk-hai, he saw the defiance, and he understood. The gates of Orthanc would not open to the Nine. The White Wizard had chosen his side, and it was not Mordor. Still, Sauron did not strike. Not yet. His hand could not yet reach Saruman. So he waited, and plotted, and sent messengers. 2 days after Gandalf's escape from Orthanc, the Witch King himself arrived at Isengard with a company of Nazgûl. They stood before the gates and demanded the truth. But there was no welcome. From the walls of Isengard came Saruman's voice, still smooth, still elegant, still dangerous. "I know what you seek," he said, "but I have it not, and if I did, you would bow before me." He named Mithrandir as the one who knew the ring's path, deflecting the eye's gaze eastward. It was a bold bluff, one born of desperation. For Saruman knew now that he was truly alone. He had no allies left. The White Council had turned against him. The Free Peoples would never follow him. And Sauron. Sauron would come in fire and ruin, unless he was stopped. Only the ring could save him. Only its power could lift him above both light and shadow. That is why he waged war on Rohan, not to destroy it, but to sift it, to find the ring if it lay hidden among its valleys, to draw it out by force if needed. His armies stormed the fords of Isen. They swept across the plains. They marched on Helm's Deep. And as swords clashed and towers burned, Saruman watched from his black throne, waiting. But the ring was not there. It had passed beyond his reach, and all his hopes, all his betrayals, all his monstrous creations were for nothing. There's a line spoken by Gimli, one laced with grim irony. "It is a pity that our friends lie in between. If no land divided Isengard and Mordor, they could fight while we watched and waited." To which Gandalf replies, "But Isengard cannot fight Mordor unless Saruman first obtains the ring." And that, above all else, is the tragedy. Saruman's war was never waged to serve Sauron. It was a war to replace him. If this chapter has brought you closer to the truth behind the two towers, we invite you to continue this tale with us. Like and subscribe to Realms Unraveled. where shadows hold stories, yet untold. Orthanc stood tall, proud, and unyielding, its black stone unmarred by time or war. For nearly a century, Saruman had ruled from this tower, cloaked in secrecy and illusion. But towers, no matter how high, cannot stand on lies forever. The White Hand had risen with force, scorched the plains of Rohan, and bled the land dry. But now, the storm Saruman had summoned was unraveling. His plans lay in ruin, not at the hand of Sauron, nor by the wisdom of the White Council, but by the resilience of those he dismissed as weak. At Helm's Deep, the Uruk-hai met more than spears and swords. They met hope, a battered people, a weary king, and an unexpected alliance of men and elves stood against the flood of monsters bred in Isengard's pits. They held the walls, and when dawn broke, a white rider descended from the hills. Gandalf returned with Éomer and the riders of Rohan, and with them came vengeance. The Uruk-hai were routed. Saruman's greatest creation, his symbol of dominion and mastery, was broken beneath the hooves of Rohirrim's steeds. Those bred to dominate fled in panic. His army, his dream, was no more. But still, Orthanc stood. So Treebeard came. The Ents, ancient as the hills, awoke from slumber. They marched not for glory nor conquest, but for retribution. The defilement of Isengard, the burning of the forests, the cries of the trees, had reached their roots, and Saruman, in all his wisdom, had not foreseen the wrath of the shepherds of the forest. They broke the dam. The river Isen flooded the valley. The furnaces were drowned. The forges went dark. And Orthanc, once surrounded by steel and flame, became an island in a sea of ruin. From within the tower, Saruman watched all he had built come undone. But pride is a stubborn flame. Even now, he believed himself master of the moment. He thought his voice could save him, and so he spoke. When Gandalf and the company stood before Orthanc, Saruman emerged, his voice once again polished, persuasive as ever. He sought to twist their hearts, to divide them, to reclaim control through words alone. But this time, it did not work. Gandalf, once his peer, now stood beyond him. He had passed through fire and darkness, died, and returned. He had become Gandalf the White, not Saruman's equal, but his replacement. And with a single word, he broke Saruman's staff. "You have become a fool, Saruman," Gandalf said, "and yet pitiable. You were once great, and you could have remained so." The voice was silenced. The Palantír, cast down from the tower, fell into new hands. Another thread cut, another piece lost, and so Saruman was left alone, trapped in his tower, abandoned by Sauron, rejected by the free peoples, and betrayed by his own ambition. Even Grima Wormtongue, the last soul still near him, now looked at his master with loathing. In Unfinished Tales, we are told that Sauron had known of Saruman's treachery all along. He saw the hunger in the White Wizard's mind, and the falsehood behind his flattery. The Eye had peered deep into the Palantír and marked Saruman not as a servant, but as a rival. That is why Sauron never aided him, never empowered him, for he knew the truth. If Saruman found the ring, he would not deliver it. He would keep it. And in the end, it was that desire, silent, festering, consuming, that led to his downfall. This was no mere betrayal. It was a tragedy. For Saruman was not born of shadow. He came from the light. He was a Maiar of Aulë, a being of great wisdom and power. He had every gift, every opportunity to shape the world for good. But he chose otherwise. He believed that only domination could bring order, that only by ruling all could he save all. And in that belief, he became the very thing he had once sworn to destroy. If this tale of ruin and pride has resonated with you, we invite you to journey with us further. Like, subscribe, and become part of Realms Unraveled, where even the mightiest fall, and every shadow holds a story. Saruman's tower still stood, its black stone unmarred by flood or fire, but within its heights, the spirit that once lit its halls had dimmed to a flicker. Stripped of staff and station, abandoned by both light and shadow, the White Wizard, who once sought dominion over Middle-earth, was now a prisoner of his own pride. And yet Middle-earth was not finished with him. Gandalf offered him a chance to descend from his tower, to walk away, to find a quiet place in the world, to repent, to reflect. But Saruman refused. Even broken, even surrounded by ruin, his pride clung to him like a second skin. He would not yield, not to the one who had replaced him. So he remained, not by force, but by choice. When the Ents turned their backs and the Fellowship rode on, Saruman was left in a silent tower, with only Grima Wormtongue to whisper to, and the ghosts of ambition echoing in the stone. But darkness festers in silence, and in Saruman's heart, no seed of humility ever took root. Later, when the war had ended and the ring destroyed, when Sauron's tower had crumbled and the eye had gone dark forever, Saruman was released, not in mercy, but in pity. He was no longer a threat. His power was spent, his army gone, the Palantír taken, the White Council dissolved. He wandered, no longer cloaked in robes of splendor, but in rags, no longer followed by armies, but by shadows of shame. He made his way north, away from the lands of power, and found himself in the Shire. There, he committed his final act of cruelty. He enslaved the hobbits, poisoned their lands, burned their fields, not for conquest, but for vengeance. For in his eyes, the Shire had become the final insult. A quiet land, untouched by war, whose people had held the ring and defied both Dark Lords. He could not leave it unspoiled. But his reign did not last. The hobbits rose, not as warriors, but as a people united. And when the scouring of the Shire came to an end, Saruman stood before Frodo, defeated yet again, not by force, but by forgiveness. Frodo, the ring-bearer, the one he had underestimated most, offered him mercy, and Saruman spat on it. He turned away, shamed, hollow, and broken. But even then he was not free of the ruin he had sown. Grima Wormtongue, beaten, enslaved, and used, had had enough, and there, on the threshold of Bag End, beneath a grey sky, Wormtongue drew a blade, and he killed his master. Just like that, Saruman the Wise, Curumo the Maiar, servant of Aulë, head of the White Council, voice of honeyed deceit, was no more. His spirit rose like smoke, a pale shadow blown away on the wind. Not eastward, not to the halls of Mandos, but away, denied even the peace of the West. For even spirits can fall too far. Tolkien tells us that Saruman's spirit attempted to rise, to cling to the world, to beg for another chance. But no answer came. His essence faded into the air, and with it, the last echo of his power. That is how his tale ends, not in fire and glory, but in silence and exile. Not as a ruler, but as a warning. Saruman was never Sauron's puppet. He was never merely a traitor. He was a mirror, a reflection of what even the wise can become when they seek power without compassion, order without humility, and victory without wisdom. He did not fall to darkness. He chose it. And that choice, once made, could not be undone. If you followed this tale to its end, we thank you. For within the stories of the fallen lie the greatest lessons of all. If this journey has stirred thought, reflection, or wonder, we invite you to join us on more paths through shadow and legend. Subscribe to Realms Unraveled for more deep lore, hidden truths, and forgotten voices of Middle-earth. For in every corner of the world, from the heights of Valinor to the fields of the Shire, there are stories still waiting to be told. Farewell, fellow wanderers, until our next tale.